Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Welcome to the Living Out podcast. It's great to have you with us today, and we are looking forward to another of our interviews with another person who's contributed to the Living Out website. But first of all, I just need to check that my friend Anne is there and is well. Anne, are you there? Are you well?
I'm here and I'm canny. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Canny. I don't know what that actually means. We'll put a translation in the show notes. We have got Vaughan Roberts with us today, which is a great joy. I think it's true to say that Living Out was born in Vaughan Roberts' sitting room about 7 or 8 years ago, when a group of us got together and a whole series of meetings happened, and out of that came the website and the ministry that is Living Out. And so that's why it's particularly nice to have Vaughan with us. We're going to ask him about some of the stuff that he's written for the Living Out website, and then just also some of the stuff he's been up to in ministry generally recently. But first of all, Vaughan, tell us where you're based.
I'm based in central Oxford. I'm the rector of St Ebbe's Church, and I've been here forever, before lots of people listening will have been born. And it's a church right in the heart of Oxford, student ministry, families, and a mixture of people. That's where I am.
Yeah, you were there in the last century, weren't you? I mean,
I was there in the last century. Were you born in the last century, Ed?
Oh, I was, yeah, very much so, in the glorious 70s. In fact, the same year. Is it the same year as Anne? Were we born the same? Were you 77, Anne?
Don't give too much away, Anne. Don't go there.
76, mate. 76.
Yeah, this is one of the great hidden stories of Living Out. I employed Anne thinking that she was going to be the voice of youth, and little realising she was actually a year older than me. But it shows how carefully I read application forms and CVs. Anyway, let's keep focused on you, Vaughan. You've been a minister for a long time. Do you enjoy the job? What are the joys of being a long-term minister in a particular place and time for since the last century? What are the benefits that come from being in Oxford for such a while?
Well, I love the job. In any life there are challenges, but it's a huge privilege. And I think what I love most, I've been a member of the church family for over 30 years. In fact, before I started working for them. And it does mean, churches are families, not just places of work. And for those of us who are employed by churches, they are our family. And it feels very much my family, because I've been sort of pretty much man and boy. And it does mean I think many people know me not just as the rector, but as, Vaughan, which is a huge privilege for me. So I'm greatly affirmed by the love of the church family. It's not just a place of work.
Fabulous. Vaughan, you've got a lot of strings to your bow. You're rector for the church. You've been involved with Living Out. You write, you speak, you do all kinds of things. One of the things that you've done for Living Out is that you've written various articles and resources. And there's an interview from you from a few years ago now, I think, on the Living Out website, tackling the question of whether all same-sex attracted Christians should come out. So I wanted to explore with you a little bit about your own kind of coming out as somebody who experiences same-sex attraction. It's a little while ago now, but I wondered what prompted you to be more open about your struggles?
Yeah, well, it's actually a long time ago since I first mentioned to anyone. So it slightly depends what you mean by coming out. In the end, I came out in a very, very public way. I did an interview for a national publication which went online, so I knew this would be a sort of global coming out, and most people do it much more cautiously. But of course I had spoken to people before that, so I was aware of issues to do with sexuality. It wasn't straightforward. It took me a long time to kind of think, well, I'm same-sex attracted. I was confused for quite a while, and I think I spent too long before I ever talked to anyone about it, because I was embarrassed, I was confused, I was worried what anyone would think of it. I thought they might reject me. And so I took too long. And that meant a long period of isolation, of just having to deal with it on my own. And that wasn't healthy. So it needn't be a great dramatic publication on the internet, which is what in the end I did. But I was much older then. But in the end, I thought, I can't do this alone. I do need some people to know. And so I just began, first of all, very privately talked to one or two friends. So it was a kind of coming out in a way, but it wasn't a public coming out. And that was the way it stayed for a long time. In many ways, I would have been happy with it staying like that. I didn't want the world to define me as gay because I didn't define myself in that way. There are other things that were more important to my self-definition than that. So in the end, I was very public, but because of my role, I think, so I probably would have done it in quite the same way otherwise. It's a very personal decision, who you tell and when. But I was too slow to tell anyone, I think.
So you got to a point where you felt like this was, a bit of a big deal, something you were wrestling with, and you just wanted some support from other people.
Yeah, very much so. So the first time I told anyone was someone I didn't know very well, actually, because then I sensed there wouldn't be a risk involved if they rejected me or if they didn't get it. That was part of it as well. Then there wouldn't be so much at stake. So I did speak to someone. I was also slightly worried that if I spoke about it, it might sort of fix it almost in a way, because I was a bit confused. It would just acknowledge to myself that this was a big deal. It wasn't going away, and I kept hoping it would go away. So at first it was pretty tentative, and I suppose I got practice then. That first time of actually expressing to someone else, this is an issue for me, that was a huge deal. And speaking to someone a bit neutral gave me some words to say. And it wasn't too long after that I then spoke to a close friend. And that was a huge comfort for me, that there was someone else in the world who knew. And the world didn't swallow me up or them up. It wasn't disastrous. They responded well, didn't change how they related to me. And so just having people who know that they couldn't fix it, they didn't deal with it, but just that broke that pretty profound sense of isolation that was there before, because here was something that was significant in my life that no one was aware of.
I guess if we're not careful, that can be something that Satan really uses. If there's something that we don't feel we're able to share with anybody, or even our close Christian brothers and sisters. You mentioned that being in ministry sort of maybe compelled you to share a bit more publicly than you would have done otherwise. How have people responded to that? How did the people in your church respond? How have kind of friends and family that are close to you responded?
People responded really, really well. Almost without exception. I should say, I gradually told a few more as time went by. And because of being in a fairly public role, I just thought if I tell many more, it's bound to leak out. And then I would be in an awkward position if someone just said, are you gay? Are you same-sex attracted? As soon as I'd be, as it were, outed by someone, it could look as if I'd been hiding and there was a lack of integrity. So that's when I made the call that actually I probably need a very public telling of this. And that was a big deal for me, because I was conscious that it would go quite far and wide, and I didn't know how it would go. But I would say people were amazingly loving, and I can't think of anyone within the evangelical Christian world that I knew well and that treated me badly. There are some out there who think that just the very fact that someone acknowledges same-sex attraction is a disqualifier, and certainly people in other cultures and in other Christian cultures, not actually in this country, but online, I know people have been saying that. And some people have said that to me directly, but they've been largely, certainly people who don't know me, and I think people who don't really understand what I'm saying in that. But all those, church family couldn't have been nice. Wonderfully, it just it didn't affect how they related to me at all. I just carried on doing what I was doing before. So I'm sure they prayed for me with a bit more insight, but it was a lovely thing. It didn't change anything really with my close friends.
That's wonderful, isn't it? And I guess that's a kind of testimony to the quality of the community life that you've got there in Oxford, that, you have relationships where being real about something that is a difficult struggle doesn't upset the nature of the relationship, that the love that you have goes deeper than that. It's really encouraging to hear that actually your experience has been largely positive. Is there anything that you would have done differently looking back? We said it's kind of a while ago now. Is there anything that with hindsight you'd have changed or slightly done differently?
No, not in the way I did that very public thing. Because I was in quite a public role, I took a long time over it. I literally wrote a list of about 150 people that I wanted to speak to personally, and I phoned up and spoke to them directly. And that was already after quite a lot of friends and family already knew. No, the only thing I'd changed going back is I would have spoken about it much earlier. It was into my early 20s, 23, 24, 23, I think it was, when I first told anyone. And, it was an issue in my teens. It became more of an issue. I mean, I never felt great angst-ridden about it, actually. I always have thought this is just will go away. But as the angst grew a bit more, it would have helped me a lot if I'd felt able to share it earlier. So that's the thing I would have changed.
Wow, that's really helpful. So going back to this question that we first asked you probably 6 or 7 years ago, should all same-sex attracted Christians come out? How would you answer that question now?
Well, of course, I've no idea what I said back then, so I hope what I'm about to say.
we're going to compare it later.
I hope it's not a complete contradiction. But what I say now is this is very, very personal, and it's got to come from within, and so there mustn't be a sense of doing it because of external pressure. And I would encourage those who are conscious of sexuality being an issue. You might be confused, and it might be a sense of, well, I'm attracted to guys or girls, I'm not quite sure. If it's an issue at all, any struggle is best shared. You've just got to be wise in who you share it with. Is this someone who I can trust, who's not going to gossip? I would say to younger people that there's wisdom in just being cautious about telling the world, because you will then be labelled and expected to think certain things and live in certain ways. And so I'd urge caution, but I would encourage people, as long as it comes from within, to share it with people. But just be conscious who you're speaking to, because if you say the wrong things to the wrong people too, so people can handle it badly, and there can be a sense of pressure. And the result is, and certainly I'd say to younger people, it can take quite a while to work out these things. And I know people who actually in early life would have said, I'm gay, and then a little bit later just say, actually, I think things are not quite so straightforward for me as that. But they've been pushed into a label, and that's complicated. And the world encourages us that, well, actually, less in the younger person's world, but I think some people give the impression you're gay or you're straight, you've just got to acknowledge and define. Sexuality for many people is more complex. So just share in a real way with those you can trust. But there comes a time, certainly I've found it helpful to be known. And although my sexuality is not the most fundamental part of me, it does impinge on my life in quite a lot of different ways. And I want certain people to know that. And if you're feeling, I can't have intimacy because I don't think I'm really known. And so even when people love me, I'm not sure they would love me if they really knew who I was and what I was like. And this is a big part of me. Well, that's where I would say, well, take a risk, not a foolish risk. Be wise in who you talk to, but don't be so careful that you miss out on being understood and being known, which is so important for intimacy.
So there's this wisdom between kind of not concealing it from everyone, which isn't helpful and kind of fuels isolation and shame, I guess, but then also not going crazy and kind of broadcasting on the internet something which you might regret in years to come, or even in weeks to come. You can
always add, but you can't subtract.
Yes.
So I would encourage not a sort of massive leap from 0 to 10. Do it bit by bit, because once you've gone to 10, you can't say, "Oh, I wish I'd only gone at 6." You can't retract once it's public.
Yeah, that's so helpful. So, I mean, thinking about, particularly maybe a teen struggling with sexuality, and perhaps thinking about how does this fit in with my faith as well, need somebody to talk to about this, and you've expressed the wisdom in talking to someone. How do they find that person? Have you got any advice about how do you even think about who to go to? Is there a kind of particular person that would be best at helping?
It's very tricky because everyone's in different circumstances. I think in many faithful Bible believing churches, although that they're clear that sex is for the marriage of a man and a woman, they get mess and understand that all of us are messed up in terms of our sexual desires, and then they're not judgmental. They won't be horrified. They'll be loving, accepting, and many of those settings, it might be a youth worker or a pastor, or a trusted older friend, and you just know that they'll be treated well. Sadly, there are churches who still don't get this and are judgmental. Most of it, I've never encountered that directly, except from afar. But there are. But you'll get a sense from what's said on this subject in your church and how it's said. And the very fact that just because they have a traditional view which I believe is the right view, doesn't mean to say that they don't understand that we all struggle in terms of our sexuality and mess. So you'll know if you're in a setting where, look, actually, they have a very unhelpful view that somehow same-sex attracted people are more sinful than others. But my experience is that's a rarity, thankfully. And so a church leader or youth pastor could be someone good to talk to.
Just picking up on that kind of a church context that is supportive and I guess encourages appropriate openness. How can we make our church cultures better at that? Because I know, sometimes we talk about, we turn up at church on a Sunday and people ask us how we are and we go, we're fine. And, how do we encourage a bit more openness about sharing about our struggles, in an appropriate way?
It's difficult, isn't it? It depends who I'm speaking to, how I'd answer that question. If I'm talking to a church member really can't change the whole of the church culture, but they can take initiative themselves. And my experience is, as I've been more open in an individual friendship or maybe in a small group, then I find others are more open too. And so you're part of the culture. So we can lament that people aren't open, but have we been open? And actually, very often, as we are a bit more vulnerable, others feel confident because they're probably looking at us and thinking, oh, she looks so sorted. I could never talk to her about my struggles. And when you acknowledge, well, I've got struggles, then they might have very different struggles, but then they may well feel. So it begins with us as the individual. I'd say for a church leader, church leaders have got more responsibility rather than just their individual behaviour. And certainly when it comes to issues of sexuality, it's not enough just to teach the truth. We need to acknowledge that none of us live by this as we should, whether in thought or word or deed, that we've all messed up, that whoever's speaking acknowledges I'm a sexual sinner, we're all sexual sinners, and I have desires that are not in accordance with the way the world was set up, and encourage a culture like that. Just, he or she needn't necessarily talk in very specific ways. That wouldn't necessarily be appropriate, but just acknowledge. And I know as I'm speaking, I would, when I'm talking about sexuality, want to say, I know as I'm speaking now, that all of us will feel we haven't lived according to this way, and some it might be, and just mention some of the areas are out there, which is really saying, look, I know you're there, and we love you, and we're not shocked. And that hopefully will encourage a context. And even say, listen, if this is an issue for you, I hope you'll feel able to talk. Please don't let it be a lonely battle. Do talk. Well, you can be sure as a pastor, if you say that, there'll be people listening and thinking, that's what I need to hear.
That's fantastic. And, it's great that people like you who have influence and are in leadership are kind of leading the way on that. You've been very vulnerable about your own story. And I guess at Living Out, part of what we want to do is show, there are ordinary Christians who battle with all sorts of different things, sexuality being just one of those things. We want to create a place where it's okay to admit to that. Just finally in this section, I wonder there'll be people listening to this show who are perhaps friends or family or church leaders or youth leaders of somebody who has come out to them. Can you suggest anything that might be helpful for them in supporting their same-sex attracted friend or family? Are there any resources that you'd particularly recommend?
I think first thing I'd say, if someone comes out to you, especially if you're one of the first they've spoken to, that's a real gift. And do thank them for trusting you in that kind of way. And recognise that was a huge thing they've just done. They've probably been thinking about it for weeks, months, years even. And they're probably terrified afterwards. So even if you reacted well, they may well be wondering afterwards, is she ever going to speak to me again? What does she think of me? Does she think I'm completely weird? So I would encourage you, go out of your way not just at the time, but subsequently. Maybe even write a letter. I don't know if you've heard of letters, but we used to write them back in the last century. But they still speak better than email, actually. A handwritten letter, they just keep on, just a note saying, dear so-and-so, thank you so much. Just want to say again, it was very precious you felt able to say that. And I will pray for you. And it basically you're saying, this doesn't change anything. I loved you before, I still love you. Ongoingly, you don't have to be an expert to feel you can help people on any struggle. I mean, actually, most of what we want is just loving acceptance, a listening ear. And so don't feel you've got to be the brilliant counsellor who knows exactly the thing to say. Just loving acceptance and ongoing friendship where Christ is at the centre is the perfect thing.
You're listening to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality. For more stories, resources and events, visit our website at livingout.org.
Vaughan, I just want to sort of chat really about a couple of resources that you've produced, as it were, since you came out, and you haven't written a sort of massive book about your experience of same-sex attraction. I want to talk to you about two resources. One, your book on friendship, and then secondly, talks you've done on Song of Songs. So first of all, the book on friendship, which I think was published about the time that you were open about your same-sex attraction, and I just want to ask you why you wrote a book on friendship and how friendships have been particularly important for you as a Christian who happens to experience same-sex attraction.
Yeah, obviously, I've thought a lot about friendship because those of us who are single, we rely on friendship. We're not meant to do life without intimacy. And if we're single, sexual intimacy and a romantic relationship is out. But that shouldn't mean a lack of intimacy. And so friendships matter. And I've had to think a lot. And I think like most single people, I've thought a lot about friendship. I've made mistakes in friendship. So some of it I've just learned from good experiences and from messing up in friendships as well. And I've reflected on it. And then when I hit 40, I think it was clear to me I was very unlikely to get married. Virtually all my friends were married. And I thought a lot of the old friendships were slightly drifting and becoming less close. And I realized I need real friendships and intimacy. So I made an effort to reignite old friendships and make newer ones. And I thought I need this because I'm particularly vulnerable, because I'm single and I'm going to be ongoingly single. But the more I was vulnerable and said, look, I need your friendship, the more I discovered that my married friends desperately valued friendship and needed it too. And that's when I thought, actually, there's a book here. It's not just for me and for my single friends, but there's a friendship gap, because I think in our culture, we put too many eggs in the romantic, erotic relationship box. And that can't deliver everything. And so that got me thinking about friendship and is why I wrote the book.
And just, I think it's an excellent book. It's the book, we always have a book of the summer at our church here in Bristol, and it's the book that sold best and made the biggest impact. Do you want to tell us just a lesson you've learned, something you got wrong about friendship and something you got right about friendship, just to sort of whet our appetite, listeners' appetite for getting hold of the book themselves?
I think when you're younger, friendships, I know we're all different, but for me, friendships just happened without me really thinking about them. And I just assumed that would happen as I got older. Actually, the reality is I found it harder. People were busier. And so I needed to give attention to friendships. And it's not enough to have loads of Facebook friends or equivalent. People who you like, people who like you, but actually aren't sharing life with. There need to be some in the inner group who really know what's going on, who share life together. And I kind of learned that doesn't, for me anyway, it just didn't happen automatically, whereas in early days it did. And that I needed to nurture friendship and make sure there were some, at least, always in a closer circle. Now that changes over time. People move, circumstances change. But I think what I got wrong was I just assumed it would just happen, and I needed to nurture friendship and give time and attention to it. And what I'm getting a bit better at, although there's still a long way to go, is give a focus to that and make sure that there are those who really know what's going on, and for mutual benefit. I mean, it's good friendship. It's always going to be two-way.
And you've been quite intentional about that, haven't you? You actually sort of told people this is the sort of friendship I'm looking for. This is what I'd love to have with you. Sort of, are you up for that? You've been that intentional to have that sort of conversation, haven't you?
Yes and no. So a little bit, but I really don't want to put excessive pressure on people, because one of the things about friendship is it's not covenantal. It seems to me it isn't something the commitment is. It just grows over time. It's not a sun the dotted line kind of commitment. But I have been a bit more vulnerable. So I probably haven't gone quite as far as you were saying there, but I have said a bit. I've been prepared to say a bit more. Listen, I really value you and your friendship, and we need to keep in touch more and appreciate that, and just express that rather than just let it happen. Otherwise, I think people either don't know what they mean to me, or they're nervous about invading my space because I think he's too busy.
And I think you've talked about sort of habits being helpful. So just getting into patterns of regular meals with particular friends or things like that being one of the particular sort of practical helps to actually maintaining and developing and deepening friendships.
Yeah, I think what a lot of single people struggle with is not knowing people. I mean, I've got more friends in one sense than almost anyone I know, because I've got more capacity for friendship, because I've got a bit more time and I travel quite a lot. I've got friends all over the world. It's a huge privilege. What I lack is a family that I live in close proximity with. So I've got a church family. I love them, but there's so many of them. So it's the kind of inner group that you have automatically if you are a family living together or a biological family. That's the inner group. So I've tried to replicate that a little bit. And to be honest, I struggle with it. It's not always working. There's one family who I go around every week for a meal. That changed my life more than anything in the last few years. And so they are very precious to me, and their kids are very precious to me. And that feels like family. It's just a continuity of friendship. It's not me going there when I've got a crisis and I need to talk to someone. It's doing normal things. When the kids were younger, I mean, a great sign for me was they behaved just as bad as if I wasn't there. And that was a great sign. It was as if I'm just invisible. I was part of the family. They weren't putting on a special effort. That mattered to me, and that's made a huge difference.
Thank you. The other resource I want to draw people's attention to is sort of series of talks you've done on Song of Songs, both in your local church at St Ebbe's, and then you also did them for the Keswick Convention, I think, last year, 2019. Why was a single pastor teaching on Song of Songs, which most people just regard as a celebration of erotic love between a man and a woman?
Yeah, well, there's a certain irony there, isn't there? And it is, it's quite fruity at times. And, a single pastor, what would he know about these things? And why is he going there? But actually, all of us have an absolutely right interest in erotic love, even if we're not physically involved in it, because the erotic love of a man and a woman in marriage is a picture of the passionate, intimate love of Christ and his church, which in Christ we can enjoy in part now by the Holy Spirit, and is our inheritance. So we talk about heaven, the new creation. There are lots and lots of things you can talk about the new creation, but at its heart is a deep, intimate relationship with our bridegroom, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I think often when we talk about sex and marriage, we tend to talk about what comes across as rules. This is what God allows, this is not what God allowed. And we miss out on the big picture. And the big picture of the story of the Bible is a romance. It's God's love for his people. God's love for humanity, God's love for the world. And a bridegroom, the Lord Jesus Christ, coming to woo a bride, which is the church, and preparing us for our wedding day. And so I take it the Song of Songs, which is right in the center of the Bible, interestingly, right in the center. I think that's coincidental, but it's striking. There you have, yes, a poem and lyrical poems and songs about the intimate union of a man and a woman. It is that, don't lessen. But it's more than that in the context of the Bible. It's a wonderful evocation and reflection of the passionate relationship of Christ that we can have now in part and can after the fall. So I find it hugely encouraging to read this in those terms. Both actually, it's realistic about marriage and romance. So there's passion, but there's also loss. So you've got three themes: loss, love, longing. They intertwine and they continue. As any honest married friend will tell you, that their longings aren't satisfied once they have sex or once they have a romantic relationship, however good it may be. There's loss. There are times when they feel a long way apart and there's ongoing longing. That's realistic and lovely. But it taps into the longings of my heart and tells me, actually, Christ is the answer to that. And at its most lyrical, it speaks of something I can enjoy too and will enjoy.
Vaughan, thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful. And links to his book, True Friendship, Walking Shoulder to Shoulder, and those talks, perhaps particularly the ones for the Keswick Convention, will be on the show notes so that you can benefit from those too. Vaughan's article on coming out, whether to, when to, is on the Living Out website, and you can find that and loads of other resources at livingout.org. Do keep joining us for this podcast. Sign up for it. Leave nice positive reviews about it. We look forward to seeing you again. We won't see you again. We look forward to speaking at you again sometime soon. Thank you very much, Vaughan, for joining us. And thank you, Anne, for being here too.